All right, so we're going to move on to learning target 12 in Unit 4, which is going to deal with plant parts and functions. So plants can be categorized into three main parts. You have roots, stems, and leaves. And each of these parts is made of three kinds of tissues: your vascular tissue, ground tissue, and dermal tissue. So dermal tissue consists of a top layer of epidermal cells or the outermost cells. So this is going to be covered by a waxy covering called a cuticle. This cuticle is used for protection and also to keep the plant cells from drying out or losing water too fast. And the dermis is also sometimes covered with hair-like projections called trichomes. On roots, dermal tissues create hair cells which add to surface area, which is going to allow them to absorb water and nutrients more efficiently by increasing their surface area. So vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, kind of the heart and soul, so to speak, of plants. So xylem carries water, phloem carries food. Xylem carries water, phloem carries food. It's important to keep those two separate. Okay. Cells called tracheids die and leave hollow tubes for the passage of water. So water, again, think back to when we talked about water, the adhesion and cohesion and capillary action, all of those characteristics of water is what allows water to travel through the xylem. Phloem, the main cells are called CV tube elements, and these cells stay alive, but they lose a lot of their inner structures. And they also have companion cells, and they create like chambers, so to speak. As you move up the phloem, it'll cut off and open up, and so on and so forth to move material, food, and nutrients through the cell or through the plant rather. Ground tissues, cells between the vascular and dermal cells, mainly consist of parenchyma, which are large cells with large central vacuoles. So parenchyma are cells that have strong, flexible cell walls that help support larger plants. And sclerenchyma are cells that have extremely thick, rigid cell walls for strength. So this is in between the inner part of the innermost part of the plant and the outermost part of the plant. Meristematic tissues, as this is undifferentiated cells. So best way to talk about this is this is where we're going to see a lot of the new plant growth. Primarily at the apical meristem, which is the topmost portion or the bottommost tip of the roots, which are where your new growth is going to occur. We'll talk about primary and secondary growth here more in just a minute, but primary growth is growth up and down, so to speak, and secondary growth is more lateral or outward growth. All right, so roots. There are two main kinds of root systems. You have taproot systems and fibrous root systems. So if you look at a taproot system, you typically have one large root that is going deep in the ground with smaller roots coming off the side. Okay. And then a fibrous root system, you have a bunch of smaller roots that typically don't go as deep, but they normally go out a little bit wider than you see in a taproot system. So root anatomy, there's root hairs. Again, we said that increases the surface area, which is going to allow them to be more efficient with capturing nutrients and minerals and water. So the cortex is spongy ground tissue just inside the dermis or just inside the outermost layer. The endodermis is the area enclosing the root's vascular tissue, and the root cap is a tough outer covering of root tip protecting new cells. So these root caps are almost like a blister. They're dead cells, but they're there protecting the new cells that are being produced and growing at that apical meristem, especially while they're in that very fragile state of new cell states. So root function, take in water and nutrients, of course. This is active transport of nutrients is going to allow for the osmosis of water. Water is going to move passively or passive transport means, and then materials and nutrients are going to have to be actively transported. Hence why the phloem cells are not dead, but the xylem cells are. All right, moving on to stems. Three main functions of stems. Number one, produce leaves, branches, and flowers. Number two, hold up leaves up to the sun for more efficient capturing of sunlight. And number three, the transport of materials. Nodes and internodes. A node is where a leaf or leaves are attached, and internodes are the space in between nodes. Buds are undeveloped tissues that can form into new stems, leaves, or flowers. So here's a node, and here's a node, and the space in between those is an internode. Okay, so if you've got any type of stem you can look at, you can pick out nodes and internodes pretty easily. Monocot versus dicot stems. Monocot stems are composed of a series of vascular bundles containing xylem and phloem. So here we see this a monocot stem, just bundles everywhere, okay? Dicot stems, you're going to see vascular bundles are more structured, and the middle area of the stem is known as the pith. So we find the vascular bundles on the outer part of the stem, with the inside being that pith. Primary versus secondary growth. Again, we talked about primary both being in the apical meristem, the uppermost portion or the lower bottom parts of the root tips. Secondary growth, lateral growth. Okay, lateral meristemic tissues called vascular cambium produces more vascular tissues. Cork cambium produces outer covering of stems. So primary is up and down, lateral or secondary growth is going to be side to side is the best way to think of it. So wood is the buildup of xylem tissue year after year, getting harder and harder and harder. You can see rings every year that a new layer of xylem tissue has hardened. All right, moving into leaf anatomy. Couple slides left. Leaves are structures that are optimal for light absorbing and also carrying out photosynthesis. So two big parts of the leaf, you have the blade, which is the flat section, and the petiole, which is also known as the stem for the flat section that is going to attach to a node or another stem. Okay, so this is the petiole, and then you all know what a blade is. You can see the midrib here, and then the primary leaf veins. Guard cells, typically found on the bottom of leaves, control the flow of water and carbon dioxide in and out of the leaf. They open and close based off what is needed by the leaf or the plant. And then last but not least is going to be transpiration, and this is the loss of water through leaves, very similar to the process of evaporation. When they leave, the leaves are going to be evaporating. And this aids in that straw-like suction movement of water from the ground up through the roots, up through the stem, and then back up to the leaves. So this all kind of works hand in hand along with the properties of water. Again, that adhesion, cohesion, and capillary action. All of those working together to move water through the plant. If you have questions, let me know. Be sure you complete the form that goes with this. And we've got one more learning target we need to take care of before we're done with Unit 4. Thank you.